We're having too much fun. Someday we'll roll on the brakes. Today's not that day. There are 250 days until the first votes of the Democratic primary are cast. And we've got less than a month until the first debate right here on MSNBC. And while much of the attention bandwidth right now is naturally dedicated to the party's frontrunner, Joe Biden, the other candidates are hard at work, each trying to manufacture their own moment and having a lot of success, I might add. While there are 1,000 ways to do that, New York Times points out it's a different game than it used to be, by writing this, quote, getting airtime has been key to winning elections for decades. But in 2019, as the Democrats each argue they're the ones who can cancel a TV star president's 24-hour reality show, there's also a meta aspect to each appearance. You do media in part to prove that you can use media well enough to win. Garrett and the table are back. I mean, Mark, we were talking about this. I mean, I actually think that this is one of the equalizers. Joe Biden doesn't actually have a lot of moments because he doesn't do a lot. He doesn't do a lot of interviews. Right. Pete Buttigieg is making news almost on a daily basis. Kamala Harris's questioning of Attorney General Barr is still something that we refer back to as Barr goes further and further down the Trump-Hannity rabbit hole.
Yeah, I mean, I think one piece of this that might be overlooked is it's one thing to get attention, to have a media moment. It's another thing to do it in a way that serves your message. And you mentioned Pete Buttigieg, who I think has been very deft, not just in sort of stepping out and taking on Donald Trump, but doing it in a way that underscores his message as a next generation of voter. Like the Alfred E. Newman thing, where he said, well, I had to Google what Alfred E. Newman thing. Now, I'm not sure if that was his best moment, but he also said, I'm surprised he had time to do this when he could have been talking about messing up his trade deal with China. I mean, right there, you pivot from taking him on, calling attention to the fact that he took you on, and making a broader point about, you know, something that Donald Trump apparently is failing at in Pete Buttigieg's mind. So it's sort of a two-part process that I think the second part gets overlooked.
You have a big impact in that you do a deep dive when you decide who to cover, when you profile, and I won't put you on the spot about this field.
Impact.
No, but you do. I mean, when you would head out to do a McCain piece.
No,
but I'm just saying, like, who's on your radar? Like, who do you want to report out more deeply?
Well,
and why?
I think a lot of it depends on what. Well, a lot of it's just logistics. I was in Iowa 2 weeks ago. Pete Buttigieg was in Minneapolis, which is two and a half hours north. Elizabeth Warren was here. Sanders was here. Klobuchar was here. So, I mean, those are people I saw. Biden was in New Hampshire a week later. It was easy to catch him. Some of it is just logistics. Some of it's who's out at a given time. But part of it is just who you are reading about, who is breaking through. Right. And I'm obviously much more interested in people who, you know, Joe Biden, obviously, and Bernie Sanders as two of the quasi-frontrunners I'm going to be more inclined to see. But there has to be a reason. And again, I hate to make the media the test case for what is interesting and what voters, you know, need to worry about. But a lot of it is just we're not. I'm
not talking about the media as having any importance, because I worked on campaigns, and sometimes the media is helping you get your message out. Sometimes they're working against you. I'm just talking about them as one of the vehicles. I mean, the Democratic candidates are using us, and I think some to more effect than others. Elizabeth Warren, and I asked Beto this question, and of course it was distorted on the right. Where's the disconnect? Because if you're a good candidate and you're having good events, and all the coverage of you is snarky. Elizabeth Warren, the delta between what she's actually doing as a candidate, she's put out more policy than the Trump administration in 2 years. She's actually a very good candidate. She's one of the smoothest messengers on the trail. And she just doesn't get a ton of press. It's not bad press, but she doesn't get enough press to represent that standing.
But she's starting to move up in the polls. And I think it's because she has those tons of policy. She's actually giving voters what they want, which is talking about issues, how she's going to make their lives better. And it's amazing to watch because you see her connecting with the crowd. She's like kind of a big force on stage. She really connects. And that's part of what Garrett was saying, connecting with the crowd, really being out there. And it's that retail politics. And just to add, we were talking about media and where we were. Like 11 years ago, we have to remember Twitter in April of 2008 had just started. So
I was on the campaign. I didn't have Twitter.
So the point that I'm making is that now you have these social media platforms plus the retail politics. And then if you add policy to that, there's ways to connect with voters. There's ways to get yourself out there because we are in a different place in 2019.
Garrett, who's doing this the best? Who's sort of using us to their greatest advantage at this moment? I'm just curious.
It's tough to say. I mean, I think Mayor Pete has done a very good job of using interviews, of using town halls to make his moments. He's made himself very accessible, and he does continue to bring things to the fore every time he does this. You know, Elizabeth Warren, I think, is also somebody who has exceeded expectations. And in the end of it, that's really a lot of what this is about, right, is exceeding expectations, whatever those expectations may be. I think that's part of the reason Beto O'Rourke has struggled a little bit here, because he was so good with those viral moments. I mean, the reason most of the country learned Beto O'Rourke's name was his moment about the kneeling NFL players. I mean, that viral moment was so good, he used it to raise money, and so did Ted Cruz. I mean, it was the kind of thing that both sides paid a ton of attention to for their own reasons. He's been unable to get that lightning back in the bottle, I think because people expect him to be able to do it. The challenge is greater. So, yeah, I mean, I think there are a couple of candidates who've done a reasonably good job of this, but I've not seen the one breakout moment. And, you know, if you're looking for that, maybe we should be looking for those people at the 1% and 2% mark, because those will be the people that when it happens, it'll catch our attention in the way that I think Mayor Pete's did, in part because he was so unknown leading up to that CNN town hall.
I agree with that. I mean, I think Garrett's onto something, Gene, and this is what I was trying to articulate and didn't do so as clearly as he did. It could be one of the equalizers. So you're not at the top of the polls. Well, heck, there are 23. Not everyone can be on top. You have a moment. It's worth examining why that happened.
Right. And look, those moments are important. Moments that go viral are more important. But I would argue that Elizabeth Warren is kind of doing it the old-fashioned way, right? I mean, she is, you know, policy after policy after policy. Got a bigger operation in Iowa than other candidates. A lot of boots on the ground. She's, you know, she's doing the retail thing. She's meeting candidates, and she's moving up steadily in the polls. You know, it wouldn't surprise me that maybe a woman candidate would have to work harder. You know,
You don't say.
yeah, I'm just guessing here. But also that's it seems true to her. It seems true to who she is.
But I also think, though, that people might overstate a little bit the degree to which people are rewarding Elizabeth Warren for all the plans she has and all the issue papers she's spent. I mean, the two big breakthrough moments for her, I think, in the last month have been impeachment, which is a big issue. It's not an issue. It's not a small issue.
She was the first, right?
She was the first. I mean, she did it in a very not opportunistic way. She talked about what it was like to read the Mueller report. And the other one for her was what was it? It was.
It was another news moment.
It was another news moment. Fox. How am I?
Well, she the people.
Fox, which she didn't go on Fox. She didn't go on Fox.
She didn't go on Fox.
You know, look, you could argue strategically one way or the other, but it gained her a lot of goodwill with the base.
Can I just add, she the people, when she did She the People, she was really, really great there.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.